whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude, no more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon, the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies, rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era, and you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the North was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. Right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Oh, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them. Guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer. Telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric. Telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took them. This immigration drama that we have right now is only possible because we don't understand our own history. As a country, and particularly those of us of European descent, we have lied to ourselves about how we got here. And for what reason? See, black folks know why they're here. Native peoples know why they're here and how they got here. A lot of Asian folk know, particularly if they're Chinese American, they know they got here because their ancestors were brought over to work on the railroads by the railroad barons who didn't care if thousands of them died laying track 19, 20 hours a day. But for those of us who are from Europe, we have this fiction that we've told, and we believe it, even though there's no truth to it. You know what the fiction is? It's two parts. Number one, we say things like, with regard to Mexicans coming over the border, with regard to immigrants coming over, but only that border. That's the only one we care about, right? The southern border. I find that interesting. We're not flipping out about Canada, right? We only care about that one border, forgetting for a minute that that border was created at the end of a war that was started on false pretense by this country, after which we jacked half of their country. And you weren't taught that in school either because our history books aren't interested in telling the truth. They tell this very patriotic history that has no relationship to the fact. So that border is artificial. Mexican folk who are coming here, documented or not, let's be clear, are coming home. Their families were here before our families were here in almost every instance. But we forget that, and then we say things like, well, I don't mind them coming. I just want them to come legally like my people did. The hell does that even mean? Come legally? There was no law to break when our people came. The fact that we didn't break a law that didn't even exist, you don't get cookies for that. You don't get like a pat on the back and a gold star because your great whatever was law-abiding when there was no law that he could have violated, even if he wanted to. But we've told this lie that we came for these upstanding principles. So we'll say things like, well, you know, our people came for liberty and freedom. These people are just coming for stuff. They're just coming for jobs. They're just coming for health care. They're just coming for stuff. We came for high-minded principle, right? Because we believe that. What kind of third-grade version of American history is that, right? Like when Donald Trump says, well, Mexico's not sending their best. What the hell, you think Europe sent their best? Our people were the losers of Europe. The winners didn't get on the boat. You understand what I'm saying? The winners didn't leave. Why the hell would you leave if you were winning? Only the losers left because they had no choice. They were dying. They were starving. They couldn't support their families. To believe, and we are told, means that we don't have to have this conversation. Or we're told that it's not that we don't have to have it, it's just that having it makes things worse. You'll hear that. People will say, if you would just not talk about racism, racism would go away. It's people like you, meaning people like me, who keep racism alive by insisting on discussing it. Yes, of course, because we all know that social problems are the result of conversations about social problems. We all know that, right? Like if I were going to give a talk about world hunger, I'm sure you would all agree that I probably shouldn't do that, because if I open my mouth and tell you that there are billions of children on this planet starving from lack of nutrition, that I probably ought not say it, because if I say it, that's why they will starve, right? And if I would just be quiet, if I would just be silent, that somehow food would miraculously appear on their plates. To blame the conversation for the problem is like blaming your speedometer for your speeding ticket, right? The speedometer didn't cause you to go 80 in a 65. All it did was tell you what you've done, right? It's just a way of transmitting information. That's all that a conversation about race is. It can't be blamed for the problem of racism. There wouldn't be a need for the conversation were the problem of racism not in existence. The same is true with any other social problem. So we have to move past this idea that the more we talk about it, the worse it gets, because there's no other problem about which we would say that with a straight face. Now, having said that, I don't want to suggest that any conversation will do. Just because we have to have a discussion about these issues doesn't mean that it's irrelevant how we talk about it. There are better and worse ways of addressing the issue of race and racism. And I want to suggest to you that by and large, our problem stems, I think, from three large issues or barriers to effective dialogue, things that keep us from having the kind of discussion that we really need to have. Maybe four if I have time, but three for sure. The first is that, for the most part, we steadfastly refuse to accept that we ourselves harbor racial bias. In other words, we take this view that we have attained this pinnacle of colorblindness, that we do not see or think about race, that yes, there may be other people out there who are racist, but not me. My Uncle Jim, he's an asshole, but not me, you see. I don't have any of that bias. I have black friends. I dated an Asian woman once. I have a dream catcher in my rear view mirror, and now I have come to the conclusion that my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess. I can't possibly have any racism in me. That's somebody else's problem, not mine. So our inability to see ourselves as racially biased makes it very difficult to have an honest conversation, because we spend so much time trying to divide ourselves into the good people who are not racist and the bad people who are racist that we miss the fact that we're all being programmed and conditioned in racist ways every day. So I'll have more to say about that in a second. But the second problem that keeps us from having real dialogue and making progress and taking action after the dialogue is that even when we are willing to acknowledge personal bias, we don't see the systemic problem. So we might be willing to attack the individual racist who does something on a college campus. We might be willing, for instance, to punish the women on the softball team here at Stetson in 2005 who did whatever it was they did. I've forgotten now what had happened, but we can punish them, we can make them read my book, we could theoretically kick them off campus, we could do whatever, right? But that doesn't necessarily get at the systemic and the institutional, the structural problem. So I want us to talk about the difference, right, between the individual and personal on the one hand and the structural and the institutional on the other. So we'll talk more about that. The third thing, and this is big, and I'll spend the bulk of my time on this, is that we refuse to acknowledge the way that history affects where we are today. The way that the past affects the present. We have this incredibly ahistorical view, right? That the past is the past and it doesn't matter. The present is now, the future is then. It's a very linear thing, right? What happens in one generation apparently doesn't affect the next in our mind, and we don't want to talk about the history of racism in our country, even though, unless you understand that history, you cannot understand anything that you see today with regard to racial disparities in this country. It is impossible to understand everything from where people live and where they don't unless you understand that history. It is impossible to understand disparities in wealth or income or educational outcomes unless you understand that history. It is absolutely impossible to understand why police are 21 times more likely to kill young black men than young white men, 2 to 3 times more likely to do so even when those men are unarmed, unless you understand the history of law enforcement, policing, and how we got to this space. It is impossible to understand the current drama concerning the issue of immigration unless you understand our history, and particularly how we have misremembered it. It isn't just a matter of how the past affects the present, it's how we remember the past or misremember it also affects the present. And I'll have a lot to say.
Do you know what's so funny? I used to be so upset when white people were racist, and then I realised they don't like each other either. And the reason why I posted this is, I don't know if you've seen that viral video of this white woman saying the N-word and doubling down in the comments, and everyone recognised that she was grafting. Is that even how you say it? Grafting? Trying to be the new token white woman, racist, conservative. Anyway, that backfired because they don't like her either. And do you know why? Because they found out she's Jewish. I mean, she had a nose job. So now, after all the support, they're hating on her because she's not white. She's not white enough. Even white women struggle with this. You can be white and still not white enough. I made a thread a while ago trying to understand why there's so much discourse about hair colour in the white community. People love to throw around that black people care so much about hair. We always make a big issue about hair. But I've grown up around white people. Hair is a massive thing in their community as well. And they even have their own form of colorism through hair. If you're blonde, you're basically the equivalent of a light skin. If you're a brunette, you may as well be a nigger. And if you're a ginger, oh, don't even show your face. I remember in school, the people that got bullied the most were people that were ginger. So, this is to say, white people don't even like themselves. They don't like each other. They're constantly reshifting, redefining what it means to be white, because at the end of the day, it's only a few select that they want to experience the privileges, the white supremacy-ness. So, if a white person's ever racist to you, don't be offended. Because there's going to be a group of their own that don't like them either.
Reagan just broke her silence and released a statement about her performance at the Olympics and the aftermath. Let's watch it together.
Hi everyone, Reagan here. I just want to start by thanking all the people who have supported me. I really appreciate the positivity, and I'm glad I was able to bring some joy into your lives. That's what I hoped. I didn't realize that that would also open the door to so much hate, which has frankly been pretty devastating. Well, I went out there and I had fun. I did take it very seriously. I worked my butt off preparing for the Olympics, and I gave my all, truly. I'm honoured to have been a part of the Australian Olympic team and to be part of breaking's Olympic debut. What the other athletes have achieved has just been phenomenal. In regards to the allegations and misinformation floating around, I'd like to ask everyone to please refer to the recent statement made by the AOC, as well as the posts on the Ozbreaking Instagram page, as well as the WDSF Breaking for Gold page. Bit of a fun fact for you. There are actually no points in breaking. If you want to see how the judges thought I compared to my opponents, you can actually see the comparison percentages across the 5 criteria on Olympics.com. All the results are there. I'm going to be in Europe for a few weeks for some pre-planned downtime, but I'd really like to ask the press to please stop harassing my family, my friends, the Australian breaking community, and the broader street dance community. Everyone has been through a lot as a result of this, so I ask you to please respect their privacy. I'll be happy to answer more questions on my return to Australia. Thanks, everyone.
So a couple of things. First and foremost, I hope it puts an end to people saying that she was doing this as a form of protest. She went out there and performed in earnest. She said herself she knew that there was no way she was going to beat the other competitors. So she went in there, did her own thing, did her best, and had a good time. It goes without saying nobody needs to be bullying her, sending her hate, sending hate to the Oz-breaking community. However, what is very interesting to me is how we have gone from a place as a society where any type of critique or criticism or anything that is not glowing and positive is received as or regarded as bullying. She is correct that you can go to the Olympic website and see how she compared to her competitors. I went there and this is how she was scored against her opponents in all 5 categories. The red is her competitor and how she was scored in terms of percentages, and the blue is Reagan. So you can see here clearly she her performance was terrible. It's very interesting to me. She has only chosen to respond to how her feelings have been hurt or impacted by people's criticism, calling it bullying. However, she has not said anything about people's criticism as it pertains to her disrespecting breakdancing or breaking. She also brought up the misinformation that is floating around, and that is something that has personally annoyed me. Y'all got to do your research. You got to stop taking something somebody says on this app and running with it, especially when the information is easily accessible. Google is your friend. Reagan, you are not a victim. You competed in the Olympics to represent your country, and you took the spot knowing that you did not have a chance to win, knowing that you were not the best. You said this yourself. After you went in there and did your best, which many viewed as disrespectful, you were dancing in the streets, partying and celebrating. Now that the response hasn't gone the way you wanted, or it isn't all positive, now it's bullying, now it's hate. And I think it's very self-victimizing, and I'm not here for it. When people talk about white women's tears and white fragility, this is exactly what they're talking about. Deflection, self-victimizing, and lack of accountability. You got to do better, Reagan.
White people, specifically white men, that will come into my comments talking about music comes from everywhere. It has no origins. Okay, so where are hamburgers from? Where are french fries from? Where is ketchup from? Where did your family come from? Because you start talking about, oh, they're from Ireland and they're from Britain and I'm 2%, da-da-da-da. So anything that's not related to Black roots or African roots or Caribbean roots, everyone owns it. It's universal. Stop reminding us about the past. Stop reminding us about where it's from. That Black people, that African people, Caribbean people actually are the culture when it comes to the US. That y'all have no culture. They want us to forget our history so bad because of their own white guilt and white fragility. It's not gonna work, baby. It's not gonna work. As long as this keeps moving, and all of us, oral history will carry us through, written history will carry us through, content will push us through, and you're just gonna have to be watching your receding hairline, because that's the big problem you have. That's the most important problem you have. You know what?
Yes, I'm white, and yes, I am against our government doing everything they can to ensure that white people maintain the majority in this country. I don't see anything shameful about that. I live in a country that is supposed to welcome all people, that is supposed to be about what's good for all. That's not supposed to be what is good only for the white people. And I think it's shameful when, as white people, we allow these things to happen and we don't speak out because we feel some kind of loyalty to our people. I don't feel that. We are in a white supremacist country, and that is dangerous for everyone. Everyone, not just non-white people, but white people too. Look at what's already happening, and we've only just begun. All of this is in the name of preserving the white majority, and it's not okay. It's dangerous, and we need to do something about it. Hey, white people, why does having a white majority in this country matter so much to you? We've definitely been able to determine that the reason why, I'm going to say all the policies, but all these executive orders, all of these ideas that are being put out by this administration, all are traced back to how can we keep a white majority in this country. If things stay the way that they are, if demographics continue to move in the direction that they are right now, by 2045, white people will no longer be the majority of this country. We will be less than 50% of the population. This terrifies most white people in this country. And my question is why? I truly don't understand why this is a problem. I don't understand why white people are willing to put humanity aside in order to strive to maintain the majority. So honestly, if you feel this way, that yes, white people must be the majority of the United States, tell me why. Enlighten me. I really don't understand.